Chapter 22, October 19th, 2169, 1538 Set, Citadel, Averill Ward, Ad Astra Citadel HQ. "What did you say?" I asked through clenched teeth. My irritation must have shown on my face since Amita Das, one of my employees who keep in contact with the Alliance, took a nervous step back. Furthermore, I noticed how she paled in the face of my anger. "It's as I said, sir," responded Amita after a second, collecting herself. "The Alliance is going to pull back on their patrols at the border to the Skillian Verge. There are some concerns that a military presence in that part is going to provoke the Batarians unnecessarily. And coincidentally, our mining operations in that sector have come under attack by pirates the moment the patrols were called back. Nobody can convince me that this was just a coincidence," I spat. The mining location itself was fine. The ships protecting it, while not as powerful as those I sold to the Alliance, were still enough to fight off any pirate attack. Yet that couldn't prevent the ships transporting the mined materials from coming under attack. They had just jumped into a system that would have been normally in the range of an Alliance patrol fleet, but thanks to them pulling back, the transporters had been an easy target for anyone. I lost 3 transporters and 2 escort ships. Over 100 people died in the attack, and the stolen materials valued around a few hundred million credits. Is it any surprise that I was pissed when I heard about it? My contact says the Alliance regrets that the incident happened but can't do much without provoking the Batarians," Amita continued. "Empty platitudes," I growled. "While the Batarians claim that this part of the Skillian Verge belongs to them, the Council hasn't decided anything. Any move that is intended to avoid confrontation with the Batarians will be seen as weakness. The Alliance knows that, so the only thing that could be responsible for this situation is that someone was bribed with enough money to ignore any possible political fallout." I turned away from Amita and towards my office window, taking in the sight of the Averill Ward. The view from my office always helped me to calm down somewhat. Making any decision while overly emotional was always a bad idea, but sometimes unavoidable. Just like right now. I knew I shouldn't be petty and take out my anger on the rest of the Alliance, but perhaps I had to remind a few people of what could happen when I was angry. When I turned back toward Amita, I saw how Luo Abercroft, a senior lawyer on my legal team, moved closer to my desk with a datapad in his hand. He was here to remind me of every move we could make without violating any law or contract. "We will have to close the mining location. If the Alliance is unwilling to patrol that area of space, then we have no other choice. I won't risk any of my employees for a single mine, no matter how profitable it is." I stopped for a moment, a thought coming to my mind. "Were the families of those killed in the attack contacted?" I asked Luo. He nodded and responded calmly. "Every family was contacted and informed about our insurance policy. The first round of payment has already happened. And if I may add, in a conversation with a member of our PR department, I was told that our popularity ratings rose by 5 points after the fact." "Good, good," I said more to myself than Luo. Since the beginning, I had been of the opinion that every company that wanted to rise to the top should look after its employees. From the bottom to the top, nobody should feel left out. After all, good PR doesn't start with the satisfaction of the consumer and buyer, but with the workers. They would tell their family and friends, who would also tell others, creating an endless web of cost-free advertisements. Furthermore, happy workers meant that their productivity was high as well, and if they had any ideas about how they could improve their work, they would come to us with their ideas first instead of offering them on the free market. If someone started to crunch the numbers, he would probably find that Ad Astra's market value rose by 10%, thanks to the ideas of its employees. And Ad Astra's insurance policy was just another method to bind its employees to the company and keep them happy. If any employee got hurt or even killed during his work for Ad Astra, would receive a stipend that was almost like a pension. The amount that would be paid rose with every child of school age. Through this, we created a strong connection with our workforce. Ever since I implemented those methods, there had been only a few union strikes during the last few years, and every time there had been one, I personally flew out to meet with the concerned parties. I could have left those in the hands of my highly trained and highly paid mediators, but the impact of me being there was too meaningful to ignore. The big boss himself coming to hear the concerns of the little man, to listen to them, to discuss and negotiate with them, and not just to put them under his heel and crush them. You couldn't ask for better PR, and every time I involved myself in those issues, the pedestal they put me on rose higher and higher. Furthermore, my reputation as a man of honor and integrity, one who didn't forget the little people, was spreading among the lower and middle class. For now, that may be not important, but when the position of ambassador opened, it could become a game changer. While the alliance government could nominate someone for the position of ambassador, due to the influence and powers the position needed to be effective, the parliament had to acknowledge the nominee in the position with a vote of 60% in his favor. I was sure I could convince enough of the parliament members to vote in my favor, but making the consequences of not doing so unfavorably for the representatives was a nice incentive. After all, in the end, they would have to answer their constituents why they didn't choose me, and since most of the colonial population were low and middle-class citizens, let's just say their re-election would take a lot of work on their side. So what should I tell my alliance contact, sir? Amita's words interrupted my thoughts and brought me back to the here and now. How many months until we're over the deadline for the newest batch of cruisers and frigates for the alliance? I asked Luo instead of giving Amita an answer. Luo took a moment to open the necessary documents on his datapad, and after he scanned them for the correct information, he said, "The deadline for the frigates is around 4 months, and for the cruisers, approximately 6. Of course, the fines for overstepping the time limit are higher for the cruisers, but I wouldn't be able to tell you how far along they are. For that, you would have to talk with the respective project managers, Mr. Dennebrun." "Thank you, Luo," I said, and turned back towards Amita to give her my answer to her question. "Amita, you will have to tell your alliance contact that many of our shipbuilding efforts could face delays up to 9 months. Luo rose an eyebrow at that, probably already calculating the number of fines we would have to pay if I went through with my threat. On the other hand, Amita's shock at my answer was written on her face, but she quickly got her emotions under control and displayed only calmness. "It's a sad thing," I shook my head ruefully, and from the corner of my eyes I could see how Luo rolled his eyes at my acting. "But without the mine at the border, we will have some material bottlenecks to overcome. After all, I can't send my employees into areas of space where there is a clear danger to their lives with a clear conscience. It will take some time until we found a new location to open a mine, and the acquisition of the mining rights for it will take some time too." I shrugged in a what-can-you-do way. "Furthermore, there are still some other clients besides the Alliance, and we have to look after their needs too, and the deadlines for those contracts are close. And the fines we would have to pay, if we missed them, would be even higher than those of the Alliance. I have to look after my company's well-being first and foremost, after all." A sly smile hushed over Amita's face when she understood what I was playing at. Everything I just said was the truth, from a certain point of view. It was only natural that we would have some contracts for ships in the private sector, but our deals with the Alliance were our primary moneymakers. There would be some diffusivities in procuring enough materials to finish all orders in time, but it would be possible nonetheless. The only thing we would have to do was to make certain that the deadlines for the next order of ships would be longer so that we could take our time to construct them, or we would have to take fewer contracts. "I will talk with my contact as soon as possible, Mr. Dennebrun. It's sad that the circumstances force us to delay the construction projects, but I'm sure that the Alliance will be able to understand our situation," said Amita with a sly smirk of her own. Yet it disappeared after a moment, and she looked as if she wanted to add something, but wasn't sure if she should. When I noticed her hesitation, I gave her a reassuring smile and said, "I see that you want to tell us something. So do it." She took a breath and then started to talk about what was on her mind. "It's just that one thing I don't understand. How did the pirates know that there would be no Alliance patrols? Or better said, how did they know before us? Furthermore, that leads to the question of why we weren't informed about the fact beforehand. I would like to make some inquiries in that direction. With your permission, of course, Mr. Dennebrun." The approving smile on my face helped Amita a lot to lose the tension that had built up while she was talking. All those questions were the right ones to be asked. How exactly did the pirates know? It wouldn't be a surprise if someone in the Alliance informed them about the change in patrols to line their own pockets. Corruption was a problem most governments had, and the alliance was no different, no matter what some people said. Yet the fact that we, or better said I, weren't informed of them, hinted at someone trying to hurt my company, someone with reasonable political influence, since this couldn't have happened without knowing the right people. Nonetheless, I was of the same opinion as Amita that those questions had to be asked, and they were already asked. Andrew had given me the contact information of some of his agents that would be trustworthy enough to look into things for me without alerting their superiors as long as they didn't affect their work. It would probably take a few more weeks until I had a preliminary report, but I suspected some business rival was behind it, trying to take me down a peg or two and get a bigger slice of the cake for himself. Still, a second person investigating the circumstances that led to the attack, especially from a different angle, could be helpful. Furthermore, it would be a test of Amita's abilities to navigate the political world and to find out who exactly was behind it. So I gave her my permission, and with an incline of her head, she left my office. Closing my eyes, I took a moment to relax, while Luo still stood next to my desk, ready to continue to the next point on today's agenda. He gave me the time to enjoy the moment of silence. Most of my day had been full of paperwork that had to be read, signed, and filed. Not the most stimulating task, but a necessary one. I took a deep breath, opened my eyes, and turned to Luo to ask, "So, how is our progress with Project Native Invader?" "Right on schedule, Mr. Dennebrun. We have vetted the potential intermediaries and are currently in the progress of deciding who we're going to approach. On that matter, we've already approached one of the potential intermediaries of Group A. Her situation, character, and personal opinion were a perfect match for our outlined criteria. Furthermore, she decided to sign the contract almost immediately. Perhaps we underestimated her desire to get back at the people who hurt her, but from what I could tell, she will be a valuable ally," answered Luo, his face showing no emotion as if it was made out of stone. In contrast, I couldn't help the smile blossoming on my face. "Wonderful," I exclaimed. "If you think she is what we were looking for, then I'm going to trust you with this. There is no reason for me to involve myself in the project more than I already am. Still, I would like you to continue to approach people from Group A. It would be foolish to bet everything on one card, no matter how good she is." "That was already the plan, Mr. Dennebrun," assured Luo without changing his expression or tone, but somehow I could feel that he was a bit affronted that I thought he wouldn't do this by himself. "Just saying," I assuaged him. "You have my complete trust to continue and lead the project as you want." "Of course, sir. Thank you, sir. Is there anything else that needs my attention?" I asked, hoping there was something to discuss that would help me to avoid the paperwork for just a moment longer. "Only a few more documents that need your signature. Nothing out of the ordinary. I will send them up when I get back to my office." So not only wouldn't I be able to avoid doing my paperwork any longer, but the mountain of it would get higher too. My dejected look must have amused him, because I could swear that the edges of his mouth turned slightly upwards as I dismissed him with a hand gesture and a sigh. Just as Luo was about to leave the room, I called after him. "When go by Catherine, could you please tell her that she tells Captain Reveleur from Internal Security to come up here? I have some things to discuss with him." Luo turned his head back to me and nodded before the door closed behind him. It would take some time until Captain Reveleur arrived, so I continued with my paperwork. No matter how tedious it was important to keep the company running, especially since among the paperwork were some application forms that I had to sign for the team responsible for our Skycar business here on the Citadel. I delegated the Skycar business to others so that I would have enough time for other projects, but my signature was still needed for this in other projects. Thanks to this, my teams and departments could work mostly independently with minimal oversight from me. In regards to the Skycars, it hasn't become the success I had expected. Perhaps it was because the cost of constructing and selling them was still higher than importing them from Asari businesses in Citadel space. Furthermore, while I had expected that our Skycars wouldn't be popular with the working class and parts of the middle-class citizens due to their higher prices, I had been mildly disappointed that even the upper class preferred the Asari-built Skycars. Perhaps it was the novelty of owning a Skycar built by aliens, but the people in charge were sure that the trend would reverse in time. Besides, they were hopeful that they would have more success with selling them to a market that was flooded with the standard models. The fact that we would introduce several, sometimes radical, different designs which looked and drove differently from what the Citadel species were used to. Yet that would take time. The bureaucracy of the Citadel was slow, but I was sure our applications would come through, and this time without any interference. Everyone involved in the Skycar business from the Citadel side of things was convinced that the existing design couldn't be improved on or substituted by our models. But that wasn't our goal at all, so it was unnecessary to worry. As absorbed in my work as I was, I didn't hear that someone was knocking on my door the first time, but when the second knock came, louder than the one before, I was startled. I hadn't noticed how much time had passed and that Captain Reveleur was probably standing in front of my office door, waiting to be let in. "Enter," I barked out while organizing my desk and putting the paperwork to the side. The door opened and a man in his late 30s entered. He had short, cropped red hair and light blue eyes. His face seemed as if it was set in a slight frown, and multiple scars spoke of a hard life. The way he walked into my office spoke of a previous military career, and his uniform, the standard uniform of the Ad Astra security forces with additional markings announcing his rank, looked pristine. Captain Reveleur stopped 2 steps away from my desk, his feet shoulder-wide apart and his hands clasped behind his back. "Captain Reveleur reports for duty, sir," he announced with a grave voice. "Thank you for coming, Captain. Would you like to sit down?" I asked and pointed to one of the 2 chairs in front of my desk. "No, thank you, sir," denied Reveleur with a shake of his head. "I prefer to stand if it doesn't bother you, sir." One could tell from his behavior that this man had been a soldier. Every little thing of his being practically screamed it out into the world. Yet he had been dishonorably discharged by the Alliance for conduct unbecoming for an officer of the Alliance Marine Corps. As far as I could find out, it was more about his zealously protecting humanity's territory than anything else. Be it human or alien pirates, slavers, or criminals, anyone hurting humanity in the Alliance was hunted down and terminated with extreme prejudice. He was a hunter and just the man I needed. "I'm sure that you have heard what happened to our mining operation, or more specifically, to the transporters. Am I correct?" I asked while looking him in his eyes. I could see how they lost the little warmth that had been there before, hidden behind years of practice and experience. If someone were asked to describe them now, they would say they resembled blocks of ice with how cold they seemed. "I did," growled Reveleur, his voice dropping an octave. Honestly, he sounded more like a beast ready to maul its enemies than a man. "Good," I said, pleased that I wouldn't have to explain the situation to him. "I have a job for you. I guess it has something to do with the pirates that raided our transports?" "It has," I confirmed. "I want you to assemble a team of your choosing. Those pirates will be found," and my voice turned icy, made an example. "I don't want to let this scum think that they can attack my company, kill my men, and walk away from it scot-free." I stood up from my chair, my face changing into an expression that would have sent a lesser man running to the hills. My hands gripped the edges of my desk hard enough that my knuckles turned white, and I leaned slightly forward over my desk. "I want the rest of these pirate and slaver scum to understand that they shouldn't think twice, not thrice, but never of attacking me and mine ever again lest they end as this group will. Do you understand, Captain Reveleur?" The spine of the captain had apparently changed from bone to steel with how straight he stood in the middle of my office, but I could see how a small, bloodthirsty smile appeared on his face. "Of course, sir. When I'm done with them, they will become something that will be only spoken of in hushed tones." "When do I begin?" he asked, eager to begin his hunt. "Now," I answered shortly. "I want an action plan by the end of the week. Who you're going to add to your team, what equipment you need, and what ship you want. Designated as Operation Firebird, and it will end up on my desk without anyone having to look it over beforehand. Officially, you will be part of the protection detail while we deconstruct our mining facilities in the area, so you will have an excuse ready for your presence there. And if you so happen to bump into those pirates, I expect you to act in the company's best interests." "Yes, sir," responded Reveleur while saluting. "I will have everything ready by the day after tomorrow. There are more than enough people in our security forces that would like to have the opportunity to strike back at those pirates. Nonetheless, if you're able to, I want you to keep this on the down low, I cautioned. I want rumors to spread among their community, but if it's possible, I want to be able to deny our involvement. And if that's not possible, I want you to make it look like you bumped into them by chance. While acting openly wouldn't be a disaster, it would invite unnecessary attention, and I would probably have to allow inspectors to make sure that my security forces didn't violate any laws regarding the creation of personal armies. On the other hand, it would most certainly bind my employees even tighter to my company when they learned that even in the situation where we couldn't protect them, we would avenge the fallen and make sure that the perpetrators couldn't hurt anybody ever again. Still, rumors in that direction would be almost as effective without any negative repercussions. Furthermore, it would probably help to elevate my reputation in certain circles outside Alliance territory. We will do our best, sir, but I have to ask to be certain, what are our ROE? Asked Reveleur. Extreme prejudice, I answered coldly. As I said, I want them to be an example of what happens if anyone out there on the wrong side of the law dares to cross me. It will be done, sir. I will make certain of it, he responded with a determination in his voice that could and would move mountains. Then get to work, Captain. Dismissed. Captain Reveleur saluted once more and turned on his feet in a perfect 180-degree turn, marching out of my office. I slowly sat back down on my office chair, the adrenaline that had pumped through my veins leaving me, adding to my exhaustion. Perhaps it was the act of ordering the death of people I didn't even know that left me so exhausted, but it had to be done. If my enemies started to employ such tactics, it would only be right if I did so too. Logically, I knew that this wouldn't be the last time I would have to do so, but previously I had been satisfied with ruining my enemies' lives in a manner that made them outcasts of society. Perhaps my method was even crueler than simply killing them, since I forced them to live the rest of their lives without any money or reputation that they previously enjoyed. But somehow the act of ordering someone's death was completely different. I closed my eyes and took deep breaths to calm my rapidly beating heart. The more I thought about it, the harder my resolve got. I would employ such tactics in the future when necessary. If I wanted to, I could probably excuse my actions that it would be for the greater good, since everything I did was to strengthen my power base, so that I could effect real change when I got into a position where I could truly start to prepare the galaxy for the arrival of the Reapers. Yet no matter how much I wanted to deny it, the Reapers were only part of my reason. The galaxy was a merciless place for those that couldn't be ruthless, especially for those trying to climb the mountain of power, and I wanted to stand at the very top of this mountain. I learned something about myself over all these years after my memories of this universe returned to me. I love power and the influence that comes with it. I enjoy the circumstance that I can buy everything I want, and I was definitely addicted to the adoration that many people showed towards me. Was I an awful person? Did I become a person my previous self wouldn't recognize? To all those questions, I had only one answer. Perhaps. I would continue to live as I wanted and let the coming generations decide what type of person I was. But to ensure that there would be future generations, I had to make sure that the Reapers were defeated. Maybe it was time for me to think about how I could slowly start to prepare the rest of the galaxy to accept the possibility that the Reapers even existed. But I would have to think about this later in my apartment, because for now, there was still enough paperwork to take up the rest of my workday. Chapter 23. December 14th, 2169, 1437, reach Olympus system, en route towards Arndt Facility Vinci. You know, I drawled, the last time I visited this facility, I didn't have to go through all this nonsense. First, I had to travel to Earth, where a team of Alliance Marines escorted me to an on-planet military base. We changed transports again to fly up to a frigate waiting in orbit. Thankfully, the frigate jumped directly into the Olympus system without any detours. When we arrived in the system, we took another transporter down to the planet, and I noticed that its ID was different from the one we took to the frigate. We landed on the planet, and I had only enough time to take a look around before they led me toward another shuttle that would finally take me to our end destination. Couple all of that with repeated checks for any tracking beacons or bugs every time we changed transports, and one could understand why I was annoyed with everything. The last time you visited this facility, Mr. Dennebrun, you were a high-ranking member of the Alliance government, responded Captain Messa Bergamini. Furthermore, he continued, the security measures at this facility have been doubled since your last visit, especially now that we are sure that the Solarians have managed to acquire enough information to build a functioning DR drive of their own. The whole system could become compromised. I couldn't help but roll my eyes when I heard this. It was always just a matter of when and not if they could replicate it. And besides, I'm pretty sure the whole galaxy already knows of this place. If not the exact coordinates, then at least the sector. If I remember correctly, the first rumors about this place started to appear a few months after we settled on it. Captain Messi Bergamini seemed to sink a bit deeper into his seat. I had to wonder how he did that. The shuttle was made for military purposes, and my stiff back told me that what he did was quite impossible. Quite true, Mr. Dennebrun, quite true, he agreed tiredly. It's just that the latest intelligence reports about the Solarians' progress in building their own DR drive has quite a lot of people anxious. Alliance High Command thought we would have the advantage of space travel unrestricted by the relays for a while longer. Now those same guys are worried that it is only a matter of time until we have to deal with Solarians in the system. It was always just a matter of time, I scoffed. Personally, I'm surprised it took the Solarians so long to make enough progress for the AIS to notify High Command about it. But I also think it will still be some time until we have to worry about the Solarians using the DR drive effectively. Why do you... The captain was interrupted when the shuttle experienced turbulences that shook us in our seats, but as the shuttle recovered, so did the captain. And this time he asked his question without interruption. Why do you think so, Mr. Dennebrun? A small smile appeared on my face, and I turned my head to the left. If we had traveled with my personal shuttle, I would have been able to look out a window to see the landscape flying by. But in this military transport, the only thing that greeted me was steel. I suppressed a sigh as I turned back to face Messa Bergamini and said, Arrogance, my good captain. Arrogance. I waited for a moment to let that one word sink in, and I could see how he was at first confused, but then slowly came to realize what I meant. Still, it wouldn't hurt to elaborate on what I meant so that we could continue our discussion. It could still take some time until we arrived at our destination, and without any of my data pads, I couldn't even work. So talking was the only distraction available to me. The Solarians believe in their own superiority, hundreds upon hundreds of years as the most scientifically inclined species in the galaxy, producing innovations almost daily and being seen as the smartest species by the rest of the galactic community. It's hard not to develop hubris, and that's why they will have difficulties adapting the DR drive to their existing technological progress. There was a spark of understanding in Messa Bergamini's eyes as I finished. I read about the difficulties you had when you started to combine Element Zero with the DR drive when I got appointed as your military liaison officer. If the Solarians try to do the same, they will get a radically different result. Exactly, I said with a nod. All of our ships are equipped with drives that combine EEZO and DR technology. So I'm sure that the Solarians will think that both depend on each other rather than two completely different technological disciplines. Furthermore, they believe, quite rightly in my opinion, that they have achieved a mastery over EEZO technology that will take us a long time to reach. If we take this thought further, what do you think the Solarians will do? They will use the DR drive with a fully powered EEZO core, answered Messa Bergamini almost immediately, probably without testing the DR drive on its lonesome beforehand. Since we can use the DR drive with less sophisticated EEZO technology, they will think their greater knowledge about it will improve the drive even more. Correct, I agreed, and my smile resembled a shark's. During the first test, the ship will be lost inside the rift, brought off course by the dimensional winds. And the best thing about it, the Solarians observing the experiment won't know what happened. It will set their efforts back by months. They won't be able to comprehend that their superior EEZO tech is the cause of their failure. Of course, at one point they will be able to figure it out, but I can't see it happening soon. Meanwhile, continued Messa Bergamini, we continue to further our understanding of EEZO and DR technology, each of them independently, combining them later on into a new field. That way, we will be able to bridge the gap between us and the established galactic superpowers. Is that one of the reasons you champion the combination of existing and new technological innovations, with Element Zero to be seen as a completely different field of research? Among others, yes. I dislike how the galaxy seems to restrict itself to EZO technology. It looks like they see the Protheans as the apex of technological and cultural progress, without any thought of deviating from the pre-existing path or going even further than the Protheans. And by going a different way, we can surprise our opponents by doing things differently from how they're used to. Exactly, I said with a grin. The captain replied with a grin of his own. We settled into a comfortable silence for the rest of the trip to the facility. December 14th, 2169. 1440 set. Redacted. SNV Shining Light, Colonel Savile Mihara, STG. He swiped over his mouth with his thumb once again while he observed the bustle around him. The crew was finishing the final preparations for the opening of the rift, as the humans called it. Savile couldn't help the scoff that escaped him whenever he thought of those upstarts. He had been a young hatchling when the incident happened that led to a brief but brutal battle between the humans and Turians. Barbarians, both of them, he thought, disgusted. How they even achieve space travel is still a mystery to me. Intellectually, he could understand how. The Turians had access to Prothean ruins and, like the Asari and Solarians, used them to great effect to bring their civilization into a new age. Yet how the humans did it without the help of any remnants of Prothean technology at first, and even created another method of space travel over long distances. Something that his own species hadn't accomplished by themselves. Even now, they would be using technology created by humans. Even an idiot can have one good idea in his life. Salvin was sure that the creation of this so-called DR drive was only a fluke. A species as young as humanity wouldn't have been capable of something like that otherwise. He would never be able to believe that a species so young could invent another form of space travel intentionally, especially when they had only just discovered the mass relays and mass effect technology left behind by the Protheans. It probably happened during a failed experiment, trying to travel between star systems with an inferior EEZO drive. At least, that explanation would fit their less sophisticated use of it. Salvin was sure that the additions and improvements they had made to the DR drive would leave anything created by the humans in the dust. "Sir, the preparations are done. We're ready to jump at your command," called the pilot, and a smile appeared on Salvin's face. This was it. He would become the first Solarian to use the new technology. His name would be known by future generations of STG agents as the one to take the first step into a new age of intelligence gathering. "Activate the drive and get us through the rift, pilot," ordered Salvin, and the bridge crew followed his command at once without any signs of hesitation. Right before the observation window of the bridge, a circle of blue light appeared in front of the ship, and the SNV Shining Light slowly drew closer to it. If Salvin was truthful, he would admit that the appearance of the blue circle was mesmerizing. He couldn't turn his eyes away from it as it grew bigger the closer they got. Then the moment of truth arrived as the nose of the ship pierced the circle and disappeared into the blue light. Moments later, the rest of the ship followed, and the black background of the galaxy vanished, leaving only the colors blue and white. Salvin's heart was beating faster than it had ever before, and it seemed like his surroundings were disappearing until only the blue and white of the rift were left. He was so immersed in the sight that he didn't hear that his sensor officer was calling him. Only after the third time calling for his attention did Salvin leave his trance, focusing on the officer. "Repeat that, officer," he snapped out. "We're getting readings of some kind of radiation that are not in our systems, and their levels are rising into a dangerous territory quickly." Before Salvin could order anything to counter the rising radiation levels, a shudder went through the ship, throwing more than one Solarian to the ground. "What's happening now?" he cried out, and a slight bit of fear appeared in his voice. "I'm losing control of the ship," cried the pilot helplessly. "Something is pushing us around, and I have my hands full, keeping us steady." A siren started to sound on the bridge, and simultaneously another officer called, "We just lost our right wing. Deploying atmosphere seals." But before the officer could do anything, the ship shuddered once again, and this time it was like an explosion hit the bridge. A few of his fellow Solarians cried out as their bodies were pierced by flying metal pieces. "I'm losing control of the ship!" screamed the pilot, and Salvin could see everything, every single dream he ever had going up in flames right before his eyes. The last thing he ever felt was confusion. Confusion over what exactly went wrong. Then it was like the whole ship was ripped apart by an invisible beast. December 14, 2169. 1448 set. Redacte, redacted. ESNV observing shadow. Major Mies Kikai, STG. "They should have appeared on our sensors by now," muttered the Solarian to his right, and Mies could only nod in agreement. "Even if it's an untested drive, an in-system jump shouldn't take so long. Besides, we saw that the Shing light opened the rift and flew into it. So what is taking them so long?" asked another Solarian, tasked with observing the experiment. "The experiment was a failure, and the shining light is probably lost with all hands," stated Mies after careful consideration. The two Solarians turned away from their equipment that recorded every single second in detail of the experiment to face him. He could see the confusion on their faces, but he wouldn't say anything until they asked. It wasn't in his nature to give out information without anyone asking, and it didn't matter to him if the information was classified or not. "What makes you say that, sir?" asked one of the sensor officers after a moment of silence. "Even if it's an untested design, the exit should have opened by now. Every data we acquired from the humans points to that. Since that didn't happen, the only conclusion we can draw is that something went wrong inside the rift. So the only question left is what went wrong." Mies nodded slowly, and the sensor officers turned back towards their terminals, starting to analyze every shred of data their equipment recorded. In the ensuing silence, Major Kikai was alone with his thoughts, but his ears were always open. He learned young that sometimes just listening was enough to acquire all the needed information and to draw the correct conclusions. So when the two sensor officers started to talk, Mies started to listen. "Do you think that has anything to do with the rumors circling in IT?" "Could be. I've heard that guys in IT were searching for something in the last data package and found nothing." Interesting theory, thought Mies, but ultimately wrong. They found nothing because there wasn't anything. The analysts are sure that Oscar Dennebrun knew what he was doing when he let that drop. A smokescreen, intended to delay our progress, nothing more. Still, I should make a note to check again in my report. For 5 years, Miaz had been working in the STG division responsible for the surveillance of human territory. And truth be told, the AIS was a more worthy opponent than the different agencies of the Asari or the Turian Military Intelligence Services, TMIS. When he started working for the STG more than 8 years ago, he heard about the counter-espionage abilities of the AIS from some of his colleagues, but didn't think much about them. 3 years later, he was relocated to his new division and learned the hard way that the humans were more than capable enough to give the STG some trouble when trying to do their job. The game in the shadows that people like Mies played got a lot more interesting with the introduction of the humans, and the game they played between them was a lot more subtle than with the Turians. Every time the TMIS discovered an STG team inside the hierarchy's territory, it would become a race between the two outcomes of being captured and eliminated or escaping successfully. If the AIS discovered an STG team, there wouldn't be any signs at first. It would take some effort on the STG side to notice that they had been discovered. Only after the team would begin to exfiltrate, an AIS team would be sent to capture them. Most of the time, the STG team would be able to exfiltrate successfully, but there would be one problem. There was no way to know just when exactly they had been discovered. Furthermore, it would be almost impossible to know which information they acquired was genuine and which had been planted by the AIS. Even if he was his and the entire STG's most hated opponent, Andrew Clark, the founder and director of the AIS, was respected by every single agent in the H Division. Respected enough that the STG tried to assassinate him on 3 different occasions. And every time the attempt failed before the team even got close enough to line up a shot. One time they got even a message from the director personally. It only contained 2 words, "Nice try." Mies had to hold back a snort when he recalled that particular incident. The message was found in one of their secret listening posts, and even after a forensic team went over the place, it was still unclear how the AIS managed to deliver it without anyone noticing. Yet that had been preferable to what happened when they tried to take out the former president of the Alliance, Michael Port, or the former Minister of Economics, Oscar Dennebrun. There were others designated as possible targets, but most were still working for the Alliance, so no attempt was made due to the potential political fallout. After Michael Port and Oscar Dennebrun had left their posts in the Alliance government, plans were made to take them out of the picture. Both had enough influence and power to reverse any changes that the Salarian or Asari could influence in human society if they were inclined to do so. Thus, STG Command saw an opportunity to eliminate the two unknown variables after they left the protection of the Alliance government. Michael Port was traveling inside the Alliance territory from one planet to another to observe how humanity adapted to different environments. After careful consideration, STG Command decided that he would be too hard to hit right now and that they would wait until the STG achieved a deeper penetration in the Alliance's territory. Oscar Dennebrun, on the other hand, was much easier to hit and perhaps an even more important target than Michael Port. At least in Mike's opinion, he was the backbone of the Alliance's military buildup and general infrastructure. Without his mining businesses, there wouldn't be enough raw materials to satisfy the demands of a growing galactic civilization. Either their efforts would take a hit, or the Alliance would have to turn to other markets to import the needed materials at great cost. So it had been decided that an STG team would eliminate Oscar Dennebrun, made easier by his move to the Citadel, where he would be far more in the open than elsewhere. Yet, when the time came, the whole team disappeared off the grid without any notice. At that time, Mies had been part of the Overwatch team and had a front-row seat to the panic spreading among them like wildfire. Nobody knew what had happened, and even a second team sent to the site couldn't find out what happened to the assassination team. But one thing was clear. The AIS had found out about the assassination and stopped the attempt before anyone from the STG realized it. The only remaining question was if they would retaliate, and retaliate they did. It happened when a Turian rear admiral was assassinated on a planet deep inside the hierarchy's territory. The Turian had advocated for more independence from the Council and was trying to reduce the Turian patrols at the border to the Terminus systems and Salarian colonies. He had been considered a target for elimination, but wasn't deemed dangerous enough to Salarian interest to warrant it, so it was no surprise that the STG would fall under suspicion. But that would have been negligible if not for one important fact. 3 different STG cells inside the hierarchy's territory were uncovered just after the assassination, one of them in the same system as the murdered rear admiral. The fallout from that had been immense, and the only reason why Mies knew that this was the retaliation of the AIS for the attempted assassination of Oscar Dennebrun was a drop of blood found at the site from where the assassin shot. But not human blood. No, the AIS wouldn't be so careless. It was Salarian blood, which didn't exactly help to convince the Turians of the STG's non-involvement. Only after the STG got their hands on the DNA analysis of the blood and compared it to their databanks did they start to see the whole picture. The blood belonged to one of the agents of the team they sent to eliminate Oscar Dennebrun, and it was still fresh. There had been no preservatives, so they couldn't even argue that the blood had been placed there. If it hadn't been a play against his agency, Maik would have been able to appreciate the scenario. Holy Dalatras, he was able to appreciate it. It was masterfully done, and one had to appreciate such finesse. Records from the Turians showed that no human entered or lived in the system, or even the cluster, in the last 5 years. There was still no consensus on how exactly the humans managed to assassinate the Turian without even the slightest evidence left behind. The only concrete evidence found was planted there, and the message behind it was only understandable by the STG. Mies shook his head to get rid of these unnecessary thoughts. He had more important things to do. He ordered the 2 censor officers to compile a summary of the recorded data and left the observation room. There was still a report to write, and his superiors were very interested in the experiment. I just hope the next experiment goes better. Mahara wasn't a great loss, but I would hate to see other agents go down the same road as him. Yet one thought wouldn't leave his mind now that he thought about it again. How did the AIS infiltrate the Turian system without anyone noticing? Could it be that they used the DR drive? We had to create new sensors to observe the rift phenomena, but the IESO in the ship should still appear on the regular sensors. December 14th, 2169, 1503 set, R&D facility Vinci. I stretched my arms above my head to get the kinks out of my shoulders when I left the shuttle. Those seats really weren't good for one's back, and that the flight took longer than expected didn't help too. Before I could look around the landing pad, a voice called out to me, "Oscar, it's good to see you. It's been too long, my friend." I turned toward the voice and saw Admiral James Wright walking in our direction. He looked well for his age. His hair might have turned completely gray, and at some parts even white, but there was still a youthfulness in his gait that fit him somehow. The bright grin on his face was almost as blinding as all the medals that decorated his pristine uniform. "James," I called, matching his smile with one of my own. "You being here to escort me almost makes up for all the trouble I had to go through to get here." James let out a quiet laugh at my poor attempt at a joke and shook his head. "Trust me, when you find out what this meeting's about, you will understand all the precautions we had to take." "That's serious, huh?" I asked, and James turned serious for a moment. "Serious enough that you have to sign Form E32, he said seriously, his mouth becoming a thin line. My smile froze on my face, and the only thing I could do was blink in shock for a moment. Form E32 wasn't something that was given out lightly. Hell, ever since I joined the Alliance almost 2 decades ago, I had to sign this form only 2 times, and one of those became obsolete 5 months after I had signed it. The first one had been when my company and I had been granted access to the Prothean tech recovered from Mars, and the other one was when I was made aware of the crisis bunker on Reach. Prothean tech, in anything we could glean from it, had become so widespread in the Alliance that there wouldn't be any breach in agreement if I sold or told others about it. I only had to sign it so that the Alliance would be the only organization with access to ESO technology during its infancy, so that the superpowers on Earth couldn't supplement them with their own organizations. The other one was still in effect, and if I told anyone without the necessary security clearance about the bunker, I would have to face the consequences of breaching the agreement. The consequences? Being labeled a traitor to humanity and executed without trial. That's how serious this form was. Yet I didn't feel uneasy. Instead, I could feel how my anticipation started to build up. Just what did they find to bring out this form? And why would they call for me? I wasn't part of the Alliance government anymore, so they were under no obligation to tell me anything. My best guess was they needed Takahashi for something, and he insisted that he would only agree if I was involved too. Or perhaps they needed more funds that wouldn't appear anywhere in the Alliance's bookkeeping. Possibilities over possibilities. But I would never find out anything if I just stood there. "You still know how you can interest me, my old friend," I said easily after I recovered from my momentary shock. James laughed good-naturedly, and a smile started to appear on my face too. "So," asked James after he had stopped to laugh, "do you want a tour?" He pointed to the area before us. "We got some time before the meeting. Barbara still needs some time before she can join us." "Barbara is coming too?" That was a surprise, but a good one. It had been years since I last saw her. "Yeah, it's almost a reunion of the old gang. We're just missing Michael and Anita. But back to Barbara. She's running some kind of experiment, and you know how she is when she's focused on her work." James finished his statement with an eye roll. I tried to suppress a chuckle, but didn't quite manage it. "So, you want that tour or not? I will take it gladly. I want to see what the tons of money I sunk into the Alliance got us for toys," I joked. With another laugh, James started to walk away and signaled me to follow. I joined him moments later, eager to see how far the Alliance military had come. Chapter 24. December 14th, 2169, 1515 CT, Reach Olympus System, R&D Facility Vinci. James and I walked side by side as we left the landing platform. The 2 soldiers guarding the platform straightened up when James walked by and saluted, which James returned. I couldn't help the slight smile when I noticed that the two soldiers carried AR Wright 2s. It wouldn't surprise me if James still got a kick out of a rifle named after him. The Alliance signed an exclusivity contract with my weapons sub-company for the AR Wright 2, and from the reviews that went over my desk, they were happy with it. Better cooling than before, slightly better penetration power that could take down a kinetic barrier in 3 to 4 shots, and adaptable to different mods. Furthermore, several kinks that could make the weapon misfunction in the heat of battle were now non-existent. All in all, it was a reliable rifle, and its successor was already in development. I let my eye wander around the area until James hit me softly with his elbow to get my attention. He pointed to the right toward a warehouse whose doors slowly opened. "Look over there," said James. "They're going to take Betsy out for a walk." "Betsy?" I asked, confused about the name, but he just shrugged. I don't know what the guys thought when they named it, but they seemed to like it, so the commander in charge of the facility doesn't say anything about it. And I think the engineers and mechanics should have fun naming their babies. Probably helps their motivation too. So what is Betsy? Yet my question wasn't answered by James, but by the thing coming out of the warehouse. I didn't see anything at first, but I could hear its thumping steps. They were powerful enough to let the ground and even my body vibrate. Moments later, it came through the open warehouse door. A 3-meter-tall machine appeared in the opening. It resembled a human only in broad strokes. Its torso was in the form of a sphere with a dent at the top. The orange glowing cameras in the bulge resembled eyes and gave the whole the impression of a head. Even from my position, I could recognize that the materials used for the torso were the same as those used for tanks. Strong enough to shrug off 1 or 2 tank shells without losing its structural integrity. The machine's limbs didn't have a metal sheathing, and one could see their inner workings. Every time it took a step, the servo mechanism would move up and down, transferring the needed energy to get the giant machine moving. My eyes moved to the machine's hands, and they were the part that resembled a human the most. While they were large, the fingers looked flexible enough for different tasks. I turned toward James and asked, pointing at the machine, "So that's Betsy?" Disbelief sneaked into my voice. It was hard to connect the name Betsy with a mech that looked like it would be able to break me like a dry twig. James, that ass, just looked at me with a big shit-eating grin. "Yep, that's Betsy. Isn't she a beauty?" My head moved toward the mech and back to James more than once, trying to comprehend what I saw before seemingly giving up. "All right," I said with a sigh. Trying to understand the minds of soldiers was sometimes like trying to understand little children. At one point, you stop and start to accept it without any further questions. And that was my strategy from now on. As far as I knew, James would introduce me to such situations more than once in the time until the meeting. "So what is Betsy exactly? She looks somehow familiar, but I can't remember where I saw her before," I asked, changing my address from it to her. "She looks familiar because she is the newest model of the heavy troopers," replied James with pride. "Weren't they just exoskeletons?" "At first, yes. We modified the force multiplier exoskeletons used for cargo hauling so that they could be used on the battlefield." After Shang-Chi, his shoulders dropped the slightest bit as he recalled the memory, but he shook it off fast. The reports showed that they were very effective in combat. So a team of engineers got together to think about how they could transform the modified exoskeleton into something worthy of our military. They had 2 different ideas, and Betsy is, as I said, the newest model of one of them. "If that's one idea," I asked, "then what's the other?" James suddenly started laughing, and I could only look on confused until he calmed down enough to explain what was so funny about it. Sorry, he apologized. "It's just that every time I think back to the moment Darius, the lead engineer behind the project, gave me an answer to that exact question, I can't help but laugh at how simple the answer is." With a smile, James stared into my eyes and said, "The 2 ideas were this: making it bigger and making it smaller." I waited for a moment for the rest of the answer, but then realized that this was it. My hand hit my forehead with a satisfying smack, and I groaned. "That really is simple," I said, chuckling. "It is, isn't it?" agreed James, smiling brightly. "So if that is the big one," I pointed toward Betsy, "where's the small one? For that, you will have to wait a bit longer. I'm sure we'll see some of the smaller ones. There's a group of them training close by, and the guys that know how to take care of the suits are here at this facility. Just let me say this. The suits are still in development. The engineers had more trouble with making them smaller than bigger. It costs a lot more too. I should know. I had to sign the budget for every single suit. So many zeros. James drifted off, and his eyes seemed to stare far into the distance. The temptation to clap my hands in front of his face was there. Yet before I could follow through with my plan, James returned to the here and now. He started walking again away from the warehouse, and I followed him. "What else can you tell me about Betsy?" I asked, eager to know more about the heavy combat suit. If we want to be precise, Betsy is a HES, heavy exoskeleton suit, Model 6C. The Model 6C is supposed to be able to function in all terrains and climates. It has some problems with extreme cold and heat, but the lead engineer assured me they are working on it. Furthermore, if the terrain is too rough, it gets unstable on its feet. A work in progress too, but there aren't just problems. The HES runs 40 miles per hour in a straight line and up to 30 miles per hour if the ground is uneven with obstacles. It can shrug off small arms fire like it's nothing and can even survive a tank shell at almost point-blank range. Yet their greatest achievement is the hands. While they're not suited for fiddly work, they can do most tasks just like a human hand. I've seen 2 pilots competing for the fastest time reloading their rifles, and let me tell you, they are fast. All in all, everything James told me painted a picture of a worthy addition to the Alliance military. "You said this is Model 6C?" I asked, and James nodded. "What does the C stand for?" "Combat," he answered. ReArts, the company producing them for the Alliance, has 2 different versions. The C model is for Alliance use only, and the G model is for the public. The G model is designed to be a multi-purpose tool, from hauling cargo to disaster relief work. If I had to take a guess, I would probably say that you should look into buying some of them too. I'll think about it. And I would think about it. If they were as good as James said, then they would become a great help in many of my company's divisions. Working in mines and helping with the construction of starships, the possibilities for their use were there. I made a mental note to have someone look into buying a dozen or so for a first field test. And if they proved themselves, then I would place another order. We continued our tour of the facility, and James pointed toward one thing or another from time to time and explained what we were seeing. Sometimes I would be just a new addition to an existing vehicle, and at other times it was a prototype of a new version. Yet nothing had been so novel as the HFY, the arrival of a troop transporter, changed that. When the truck appeared in the distance, James stopped and signaled me with a raised hand to do the same. I watched as it came closer, and I could see it was the new ATP with reinforced sides. At the back, it could open to 3 sides separately so that the soldiers inside could leave the vehicle without coming under fire and had cover available to them immediately. The ATP slowly stopped a few meters away from us, and its back ramp lowered to the ground. A group of soldiers left the truck single file, and I was working hard, not letting my jaw drop. All of them were at least 2 meters tall, but I couldn't tell if that was because of the people themselves or because of the armored suits they wore. The suits were deep black, and even I, someone that didn't have much expertise in engineering, could tell they were masterpieces. "And that's the small version," James said, noticing my gobsmacked expression. I tried to school my expression, and I would like to think I did a good job with it, since James didn't make any comments about it. One of the soldiers left the group and came towards us, but a raised hand and a shake of the head from James were enough to stop him in his place. With another gesture, he signaled him to go back to his group, which the soldier did. I took another moment to observe the group of soldiers before I hurried to catch up with James, who had already started walking again. "So who are they?" I asked, unable to hold my curiosity back any longer. "The first batch of Project Orion," answered James. I didn't know that the project was already in progress. And I didn't. I had seen plans for this project due to my friendship with James and Andrew, but from what I knew, the project had still been on the drawing board when I left the Alliance, and nothing had indicated that that would change in the next few years. I could convince the rest of the board that with the research into making the exoskeleton small enough to act as personal armor, We should at least train a small group of soldiers for the project. That way, we could start to observe which points of the suits, the soldiers' training, or anything else has to be adapted. So those guys are basically lab rats, I jokingly asked. If you want to call them that, you're not wrong on that account. Besides, if you want to get technical, they're your lab rats too. My lab rats? Well, Dr. Shales to be precise. That made a lot more sense. Constantine had finished his first batch of stable genetic modifications for the Alliance military, and it had been green-lighted for distribution among the forces. Every single soldier, no matter if Army, Navy, Marines, veteran, or new recruit, would get an injection that would infect them with a virus that would alter their DNA over the course of 3 months. As far as we knew, the only observed side effects had been that the infected had a higher body temperature of 0.2 degrees and a cough. Even Dr. Shale couldn't say anything about long-time effects, but was already looking into it as a side project. The reason why it had been green-lighted so fast was that, thanks to the gen modification, the overall performance of the average Alliance soldier rose by 11%. And that was just the first success. Constantine was already working on improving it even more, and his first estimation of the percentage of the new virus was 16 to 17%. Yet that wouldn't explain why James called those soldiers his lab rats. Unless... So they got the new enhancements before anyone else? I asked, and my guess hit the nail on the head if I read James' expression correctly. We told them everything, of course, said James, not looking at me. They knew that it was an experimental genetic modification virus and that there was no study of potential side effects, short or long term. Yet they all agreed voluntarily, and the results speak for themselves. 15% better performance across the board. An interesting fact, James. Yet there is one thing I would like to know, I said slowly through clenched teeth while staring at James, who still didn't turn to face me. How did you get your hands on the newest, still experimental, virus out of Dr. Shale's lab without me knowing anything about it? Even if he didn't turn towards me, I could still see the grimace on James's face that spoke of a deep-seated unease. Since the laboratory Dr. Shale is working in is partly under the jurisdiction of the Alliance, part of the brass believed that the results of Dr. Shale's research belonged to them as much as you. On their orders, an agent recovered an example of the virus for testing. Belonged to them? I growled, and James's grimace got even more pronounced. Do you know how much money it cost me to put up that lab? To staff it? To pay for every bill? To get everything they need for their research? I was slowly starting to scream, and I could feel how my face started to heat up. Millions, James. Millions upon millions. The only thing the Alliance does is provide additional security besides the extensive security system that I paid for too. And what will happen if that version of the virus mutates due to instability? It's not a finished and stable product, but an experimental one. There could appear dozens of complications in the near future. And who do you think will have to answer for them? Not the Alliance, that much I can tell you. After all, my company is currently the only one that's researching in that direction, with enough success that something could appear outside of the lab. Please tell me that those idiots got what they deserve and that every sample of the virus has been used up. Of the latter, I can assure you. I made sure that after the volunteers for the Orion Project received the treatment, the rest of the virus got destroyed. Officially, it was because of my concerns that the remaining samples could be stolen by our enemies. And what about the people who ordered this? That's a slightly more difficult situation. The man behind it is Rear Admiral Balboa, and he had more than enough backing that my hands are tied in this situation since he didn't violate any regulations that I know of. I'm sure that something happened, but without any knowledge about what happened, I can't do anything. The best I could do was to reassign him to another position, so he won't be able to repeat this. Furthermore, Rear Admiral Nguye, who I assigned to take over his previous position, has my full trust, and I can assure you that it won't happen again. I closed my eyes for a moment and concentrated on my breathing. Breathing in deeply through my mouth and slowly exhaling through my nose, I tried to force myself to calm down. It took a few seconds, but I felt myself calm down, so I wouldn't say anything I didn't mean when I opened my mouth again. When I opened my eyes again, I could see that James had finally turned to face me. and the apologetic expression on his face helped me to calm down too. It wasn't his fault that some people under his command thought they could do whatever they wanted without fearing any reprisal. If I had been in their position, I could see myself deciding to do the same thing. The only reason I was angry was that I was the aggrieved party. "What's done is done," I said after a while, and James visibly relaxed at my words. "But don't think that this won't have any repercussions. You said that with the new Rear Admiral this situation won't repeat itself? Well, I will make sure that it can't be repeated. Furthermore, since I lost a lot of money thanks to this, you can expect the new batch of gen treatments to be more expensive than expected." "That's only fair," agreed James. "And you will ring me up if your exploratory fleet finds any planets with high amounts of mineral resources. I lost a lot of money this year thanks to incompetency or bad decisions on the side of the Alliance, so it's only fair if they help me recuperate from those losses. That won't be a problem. But I have to say, you know how to get the best results out of a bad situation," chuckled James, and relaxed even more than before. "If the people around you try to put you down, then the best thing you can do is to stand up again and again, until they understand that you won't stay down, or you're able to crush them all under your foot." "Harsh," James commented. "Harsh, but true. I'll see what I can do." "I hope so. After all, I'm still the guy who builds your pretty little ships. So everything you find will come back to you anyway, just in a different form." That elicited a quiet laugh from James, and a small smile appeared on my face. "Come," said James, nodding towards a building to the side. "Barbara should have finished her experiment by now. At least she should be soon at the conference room when we get there." I replied with a nod, still smiling softly, and followed James towards the building. I was just a step behind him, and when I was sure he couldn't see my expression, I dropped my smile and a frown replaced it. While I didn't lie that I didn't blame James for the theft, and that was it, no ifs or buts, the same couldn't be said about Rear Admiral Balboa. There was no way I could let this slide. What would happen if others learned about this incident and thought they could get away with this? Besides, it would set a bad precedent for the Alliance. Every officer or politician with ambition would think they could do whatever they wanted without fear of retribution since they were part of the Alliance, and I wouldn't touch them thanks to that. I couldn't allow that. Never. It would make me look weak, and if I wanted to become the ambassador, I couldn't be perceived as weak. Yet I decided to shelve my thoughts on the subject for now. Without any means of secure communication, I couldn't give any orders pertaining to my revenge without an information leak. When I did this, I wanted everything to be airtight. Everyone should be able to know that this was my doing, but there should be nothing that could be used against me. This wasn't like my revenge against those pirates at the border of the Skillian Verge. There I could probably kill them myself, put up a video of it on the extranet, and nothing would happen. Nobody would like to go against one of the most influential and wealthy humans for some pirate scum. Power, as I had, was like a carte blanche. I could do things that others would sit behind bars for life. Still, there was one problem with my carte blanche. I couldn't do the same to anyone in the government as the pirates, and Rear Admiral Balboa was definitely included in that group. Perhaps I should amend my previous statement. There should be suspicions of my involvement in the upcoming disaster for Rear Admiral Balboa, but nothing concrete. Suspicions alone could do the job of deterring any fools trying to do the same as the good Rear Admiral. With a deep breath, I shoved all thoughts of revenge aside. The assurance that I would do something to repay the Alliance was enough for the moment. The coming meeting would probably require my full attention, and revenge plans were a distraction I couldn't afford right now. My steps sped up a bit to catch up with James, and we walked side by side until we arrived at the building where the meeting would be. James saluted the officer guarding the front door, and the officer opened the door without asking for any ID. I guess that James was known well enough around the base that he didn't need his ID anymore, and as his guest, I got the same treatment. Inwardly, I scoffed at the lax attitude towards security, but winced moments later when I realized I encountered similar situations in my own facilities. Speaking to my head of security to revamp the security protocols in all my holdings was added to my mental to-do list. Identity theft was still a thing, and with our growing knowledge and technology, I wouldn't be surprised if sometime in the future I met someone trying to steal my identity. down to the face in DNA. Perhaps I should ask Konstantin if he couldn't create something that would at least make it impossible to clone me. I didn't want Cerberus to make a clone of me and use him to get access to all my resources. That would be a disaster in the making. James and I walked through some nondescript halls until we arrived at a door with a sign that read, Secure Conference Room 4. James held a card he fished out of one of his pockets to a small black box next to the door, and a beep in a small green light signaled that the lock disengaged. He put the card back into his pocket, and without much fanfare, James opened the door and stepped in. I followed shortly behind and looked around. There were no windows, and the whole room reminded me of the innards of a gray box. Most of the room was filled by a large round metal table with a dozen chairs around it that looked halfway comfortable. There was a small hole in the middle of the table where a holo projector was placed on the ground. All in all, the conference room was unremarkable. Nothing I hadn't seen before. The same couldn't be said for the people already sitting at the table. Andrew Clark was already standing when I entered the room and shaking hands with James. A small smile was on his face as he said, "It's good to see you two. You're right on time. I got a message that Barbara already is on her way. She should get here in a few minutes." "That sounds good. I think we delayed the meeting for long enough," responded James for the both of us. "Do you have the forms?" "I have. They're on the table and only need your signatures. He didn't want to sign it until you did, too, Oscar." Andrew nodded toward the other person in the room when he addressed me. The smile on my face became more genuine when I saw Dr. Hoshiyume Takahashi put down a form back onto the table. He stood up from his chair and began walking toward me with a small spring in his step. "It's good to see you again, Mr. Dennebrand, sir," Takahashi said, a big smile plastered on his face, and held his hand out. I grabbed his hand firmly and shook it eagerly. "It's good to see you too, my friend. And how often do I have to tell you to call me Oscar? We have known each other long enough that you deserve the right to call me by my first name." "At least one more time, sir," chuckled Takahashi. I took a moment to look my best employee and good friend over. He looked good for his 52 years, a bit more gray in his hair, but he looked healthy enough that most wouldn't peg him to be a man in his 50s. If I compared how he looked now to the time when we first met, I could say with certainty that he looked far better now than back then. And his mind was just as sharp as back then, perhaps even more so. "I heard you didn't sign the form yet?" I asked, interested in his response.
"I wanted to wait for you. I just don't like it when I have to keep secrets from you, and this one seems pretty big. After all, you're my employer and not the Alliance. It would smell too much like going behind your back for me to be comfortable with this arrangement." My smile turned even brighter at this. Takahashi was truly one of the most loyal people I knew, and I was glad I earned it. "Then let's get to it. Hames and Andrew wouldn't ask us to sign the forms if it wasn't important. The fact that only those two and Barbara are coming to this meeting means that whatever they want to show us will be world-changing." Takahashi grinned and pulled a pen from one of his lab coat's pockets, holding it out for me to take. I went to where the forms were placed on the table and picked one up to read over it. After reading it to see if there were any new additions to the form that I should know about, and not finding any changes to the ones I previously signed, I put my signature under it with a flourish and handed the pen back to Takahashi, who put his own signature to the second form lying on the table. "So," I said to Andrew, who came closer to collect the forms for safekeeping, "what's this all about?" "You're about to find out, Oscar," said a new voice. "Finally," grunted James. "Took you long enough." "I took as long as I needed. Not that a ruffian like you would understand the delicacy of my experiments," countered Dr. Barbara Helkin, who entered the room quickly. "Now that we are all here, should we start the meeting?" Andrew asked, stopping the argument between Barbara and James before it could gain traction. "Yes, please," I said, giving the two squabblers a pointed look as I sat down on one of the chairs with Takahashi taking the one to my left. When everyone was sitting, Andrew started the holoprojector and began to read Takahashi and me into the situation. 3 months ago, a survey team to Janus, the next planet in the Olympus system, discovered an anomaly on their scanners. They went to check it out, and among the ice and snow, they found a sealed door of unknown make. They called the discovery in and a team of Alliance scientists arrived at the location not much later. Together, they were able to open the door. What they found was a corridor leading them deeper into the ground, and at the end, they found a large chamber. Essentially, they found alien ruins. "The planet right next to us?" I asked, and it was James instead of Andrew who nodded in response to my question. "And from how you all are acting, I guess that those ruins aren't Prothean?" Next to me, Takahashi straightened in his seat. Perhaps he had already an idea where this was going, and why they asked for his presence especially. After all, he was still the leading expert in the Alliance territory regarding all matters of spaceship construction. "You would be right, Oscar," said Barbara, fiddling with the datapad in her hands. "Those ruins are much older." "How much older are we talking about?" asked Takahashi, unable to hold his curiosity any longer. "First analyses suggest that the ruins are around 25,000 years old," said Andrew with a glint in his eyes, and I could feel the shock of the revelation with every pore of my body. 250,000 years.